in the first 5 years, built our business on the back of Google, which has the advantage of being really efficient. But when you're just reacting to customers finding you, you're not really choosing your target market as much.
Welcome to UpTech Report. This is our Founders Journey series. UpTech Report is sponsored by TerraLeap. Learn how to leverage the power of video at terraleap.io. I'm joined by my guest, Josh, and this is part two of our discussion. Josh Millet, who's based in LA, co-founder, founder and CEO of Criteria Corp. Definitely go back and listen to part one, where we understood a bit more about their people analytics software. But Josh, I want to hear a bit more of your journey, your story. Like, how did you get to where you are today? And you shared a little bit because you had one company, sold it, and then the idea came. But let's continue that journey. How did you actually build Criteria Corp and to have it where it is today, almost 14, 15 years later?
Yeah, thanks for having me again, Alexander. You know, the story of how we got started, I mentioned in the last episode, was a negative experience being involved on the hiring side, you know, as an employer. And but we got started, you know, honestly, started launching the product in 2007, and that was, if you're selling hiring software, that turned out to be a uniquely terrible timing in a lot of respects, because within about 6 months of you know, launching the product into the world, the financial crisis of 2008 hit, and so it was effectively kind of a hiring freeze across the US. So it was a pretty tough time to be.
How did you feel at that moment? You're like, great, I built a product, this is gonna be fantastic, and suddenly everyone's like, no, we don't want to hire anybody right now.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think at that point we were still, in a sense, it was fortunate that we were so small and had so little, so we didn't have any revenue to lose. You know? And so in that sense, you know, glass half full. But it was really, it really made us just focus on like finding product market fit and working with the customers we were able to get. And so, you know, we really, the early years of the company, though, as a result, were not very sexy. We bootstrapped the business for many years. You know, we launched with sort of four people in a room, you know, working on the product. And a couple of years later, we were 6 employees, you know, so it didn't.
What was that journey? What was that step? So you decided, because you had a successful sale earlier, decide to, all right, I'm going to start another company, use my own funds. How many years? 2 years it took before you say, all right, let's get outside investment to be able to grow further?
No, so we did raise, my co-founders and I put in our own money, and we did kind of like a friends and family round. And so we had a little capital, but then when the financial crisis hit, we realized, okay, we're probably going to be bootstrapped for a while. So we better, you know, when you're in that situation, you kind of have to manage for, you know, manage for cash flow as much as growth. And so we didn't know if there'd be another round. We actually did do another angel round a couple years later, once we had a few, you know, like 100 customers or something. We were able to do that, so that helped. But we didn't take real outside capital for almost 9 years. So it was a long time, and we were, even at that point, when we took our first outside venture capital, we were, you know, I think 18 employees at that point. And now have grown to about 150 employees at this point. So,
but when it comes to funding, what would you say is one of the biggest mistakes one could make when seeking funding and bringing in that capital?
I mean, I think for me, I don't think we've made this mistake, but we came close to it, which would be just going for the highest valuation rather than the best partner at that stage of the business, you know. I think for us, we've been fortunate to have 2 really good, you know, growth equity partners, and they both were really constructive. And one of them, who's our current backer, still is a great influence on the business. So I think for me, when you're growing a business, I mean, it's kind of obvious advice, but you know, you want, unless you're really exiting the business altogether, and maybe even then, you shouldn't be allured by the highest valuation only, because if you're bringing in a partner into the business, it's got to be one who's aligned, you know, across a lot of different areas.
Having that the right person, the right relationship that has the right connections and insight where you're headed is powerful. For you both before you got that major round and after, were there any key points as far as customer acquisition, sales, and marketing where you came across an aha moment? You're like, wow, this really helped us get to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was more looking back. I think it was more of a slow grind that eventually hit a sort of inflection point. We were initially focused on SMBs. That was our target market. So smaller businesses initially, small and medium size, maybe like sub 500 employees was the core of our market in the first, I would say, 7 or 8 years. And then initially, and then over time, as the product got a little bit more mature, we got our first enterprise customers. And at first it was more or less by accident. It's not like we made some conscious decision to say, let's go get bigger companies.
What happened? Did you just
Um,
like stumble across them and like you just somebody
well,
knew somebody?
so what we got really good at, and I think this is, a lot of businesses have this trajectory, but we got really good at getting customers over the internet. Using Google, we spend a lot of money on Google, and we get a lot of free traffic from Google, and so really in the first 5 years built our business on the back of Google, which has the advantage of being really efficient. But when you're just reacting to customers finding you, you're not really choosing your target market as much because you're just sort of reacting to the inbound traffic you get. And for us, that was really great for getting smaller businesses. But eventually, some bigger companies started finding us. Right? They know how to use Google too. And so, so I remember when we got our first really big customer, who's still with us today. There was a moment or a period of time where, even though the product wasn't quite ready for enterprise in certain respects, we thought, hey, there's enough here. We've built something that big companies see value in as well. And so over time, we've decided to lean into that. And now the enterprise part of our customer base is like the fastest growing revenue stream by far for us. So,
If you had to do something over again, would you have done something different?
I mean, I would say that, I think about this all the time as you kind of reflect on the journey, but I think that we were pretty stubbornly committed to, after a while, to bootstrapping because, if initially it was like, okay, investors aren't returning our calls, we're gonna we're gonna bootstrap. But then, you sort of become committed to that approach, and I think it's a great approach if you can do it. And we managed to make it work, and it was awesome. But as soon as we did get outside funding, there was this realization that, oh wow, yeah, we're so under resourced in all these areas, and once you have some capital to invest there, it really does allow you to accelerate things. And so I guess what I would maybe do differently is look around, kind of poke your head up earlier from the grind of running the business, and look around for funding a little bit earlier stage.
That is, I've heard in many conversations I've had, is the balance of when do you seek funding, when do you bring it in, when can you start scaling? Because obviously, the more team members you have, the bigger the staff, the more
Mhm.
resource and availability to grow. Uh, is it simply a moment of product market fit? Is it a moment of you start to see some scale? Like, what do you think is the right inflection point that makes sense to make the switch from bootstrapping to VC?
Yeah, I think it's different for every company, but for us there were a couple of considerations. One of them was um, the idea that we thought we could use some help beyond financial, beyond an investment. And a lot of what venture capitalists and private equity firms do is basically pattern recognition, right? They know how to scale a sales team because they've done it at so many other companies. They've advised companies on that. They know how to build an engineering team because they've done it. And so you really benefit from sharing these best practices that they have. And we've always been fortunate to have partners that are pretty nuanced in that, where they'll give you a lot of guidance but not be overly prescriptive, which for me is the right balance. And so I think for me it's like the one of the overarching concerns is, when does the non-financial side of the investment really add a lot? And at that point, it's probably a good thing to take capital.
Once you've got the funding and you start to grow, you obviously need to grow the team. So when it comes to hiring, which is extremely relevant to your industry and what you do, what have you seen as some of the big takeaways or lessons learned on growing your team from the early stage of, all right, we've got some capital, who do we first start hiring and growing?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously we put a lot of emphasis on that part of growing the business. I think it's I'm biased obviously, but I think it's the most important part of building a team is or building a company is the team you hire. And then after you've hired them, it's the job of the leadership team to make sure you create a culture that they want to stay in, right? Because it doesn't do any good if you're really good at hiring but not good at retaining, right? Then it just creates a lot of work for yourself. So for us, we've had amazing hiring results for a long time. We obviously use our own tools, our own assessments, and I think one of the great benefits of doing that for us is, in the early days especially, we didn't have any brand, right? We didn't have an employer brand or even a brand really. People just found us on the internet, and so you typically at that point don't have thousands of people flocking to work for you just because they've heard of you, and that's incidentally another benefit of funding is it does raise your visibility a little bit as an employer. So for us, like the assessments that we use were crucial because they allow you to find talent in untraditional places or non-traditional ways. And the particular emphasis we have, and that I think a lot of the vision that a lot of our customers buy into is really, if you're hiring for, call it 3/4, 4/5 of position, it really pays to focus on potential, long-term potential of those hires and not experience, which is what traditional hiring is so often geared around. That has great business impact if you can do that well. It also has great impact on diversity because most diversity initiatives, if your hiring is focused around experience, you're only going to reinforce the inequities in the world, not help solve them. So for us, that's been really key. We've found some great people in weird industries that have nothing to do with HR software. I always tell the story. A couple of our best salespeople, even today, one of them was like selling art out of a truck, selling African art out of a truck when he found us, and another one was a physiotherapist, and now they're two of our best salespeople. And if we had just been focused on looking at their resumes and what they'd done in the past, we never would have even interviewed them. And so assessments can really help you discover talent in that way.
And that is a great example and story of a use case of the personality itself and how assessments can come into play. For you as a leader, where have you gotten your insight from? Any books, podcasts, audiobooks, sites that you have read or would recommend to other leaders?
I tend to not be a huge consumer of business books. I mean, I definitely read a few. I love, since my business is connected to psychology, I love reading psychology books. I'm not a psychologist, but a couple of my co-founders are, and but I've really loved learning in that field. And one of them that sort of crosses over the bounds from business to psychology to economics is a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. I always recommend that. I've reread it twice now. It's by this guy who really sort of founded the field of behavioral economics, and I love it. It's a great book, and it's not the easiest read, but it's really great for people who are in business and thinking about the ways that human beings are not always totally rational. And in economics, they sometimes make really irrational decisions, and they do that in predictable ways. So it's a fascinating book for me. So I'd recommend that one.
I love that. I love that. For you going forward into the rest of this year and beyond, what do you see as the kind of upcoming challenges that are you going to need to overcome for continuing to grow?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think for me, one of the big things that I'm thinking about is, we were a mostly in office, on site company, and then we went totally remote, like so many businesses. And fortunately, we're in an area that worked really well. I was shocked at how well remote work worked for us as a company. And I think one of the big challenges is now, as I referenced earlier, kind of, okay, how do you go back now? And, clearly we've discovered that from a productivity standpoint, remote work is really working pretty well. And a lot of our team members love it. So we want to accommodate that. Like, I think I'll be working from home at least a few days a week, once our office totally reopens. But from a cultural standpoint, and that's something I think about a lot as CEO, is just like, okay, how do we scale culture, right? We had a really great culture when we were 30 people. It's harder to maintain that sort of energy and culture as you get bigger, and have multiple offices. And when you're remote as well, it's tough. So for me, it's sort of the big challenge is, I think, with our team figuring out, okay, how do we make that hybrid? People call it the hybrid model. We don't know what that's going to look like. How do we make that work? It might be more tricky to manage that than either completely on site or completely remote,
And you're also distributed, you said, in LA and Australia. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have offices in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane. Brisbane's our big Australian office, and then in LA, and we've got some people in New York, so that might be the next office.
Any tactics on managing a team across time zones that you found effective in keeping the culture and productivity together?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge, honestly, with Australia, because they're like 17 hours apart from us. It's not just East Coast, West Coast, and so for us, that has scheduling implications. I think using great communications platforms for your team is helpful, because that really builds culture quickly. We probably delayed after we acquired the Australian company. We took a while before we all got on one instance of Microsoft Teams in our case, and Zoom. And so as soon as we did that, it really accelerated the integration of the company. So in hindsight, I would have done that, almost day one.
Gotcha. Now, just curious on your perspective when it comes to technology. Last question for you, Josh, is what future tech predictions do you see we'll see when it comes to innovation in the near term, next year or two, and long term, 5-10 years, when it comes, particularly in the space of HR and people and the opportunity for tech innovations?
Yeah, I think a trend that we saw in the past that kind of got interrupted a little bit by COVID that is going to reaccelerate is the emphasis on candidate experience. So a lot of big companies are now thinking of their job candidates as their customers, right? And in a lot of cases they are, right? If you're a big consumer brand like Coke or Pepsi, right, the people that you're hiring or not hiring are your future customers. So you want to make sure that, or your current customers. So you want to make sure that that the 98% of people who apply to your company, or whatever it is, 95, who don't get hired, still have warm fuzzy thoughts about Coke or Pepsi and still want to keep using your product. So candidate experience is really important, and so that's one of the reasons we're really interested in game-based assessment, because it's a little more fun than traditional assessments. In some cases, a lot more fun. So we're really leaning into that trend, and I think that's a big one. And then another one I'd highlight would be longer term is what constructive role can AI and machine learning play in human capital management, right, or talent management. I think so far we've seen some interesting advances, but there's also some really problematic elements to it. But I think that train has left the station and it's going to keep growing. So how do we use that technology to make a more, not only a more effective, but ensure that it's an ethical system that we're using in terms of hiring people.
The balance of AI machine learning in the future will be very interesting. Thank you so much, Josh, for your insights and lessons learned over these years. I really do appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Alexander.
Now, for those who want to learn more, you could definitely go to criteriacorp.com or go back to listen to part 1 of our interview at UpTech Report. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode. Have you seen a company using AI, machine learning, or other technology to transform the way we live, work, and do business? Go to uptechreport.com and let us know.